Okay, hello YouTube. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Dragon Sicilian after e4, c5, knight of 3, d6, d4, cd4, knight d4, knight of 6, knight c3, g6 begins the Dragon. Then we have bishop e3, bishop g7, f3 is the Yugoslav attack. We're going to be going into this main line with 9 castles queenside, and we're going to be taking a look at the only real respected move in the position, pawn to d5, and now there's like, 6 or 7 different things that white can do here, but the main thing that we're going to be looking at today is king b1. And we're going to be focusing on kind of the main move, which is knight takes d4, even though rook b8 is sort of a little bit of a side possibility that requires a little bit of further explanation, but we're going to be taking a look at the main move, knight d4, so the main idea here being that we're mating bishop d4 with d takes e4, where black is completely equalized without much of a fight. So we're going to have e5, knight f5, and then we're going to have e takes f6. And here again, there's two options. There's bishop takes f6 and e takes f6. Now, bishop takes f6 leads to a very interesting kind of queen sacrifice after knight d5, queen d5, queen d5, knight d3. But for the most part, that position should be considered advantage white if white plays all of the technical chess correctly. So really, if you want to try to get the best position possible with black, you should be playing ef6 in this position. And here, we're not so worried about knight takes d5, because if that happens, white is going to be losing the bishop pair. So knight d5, knight e3, and then, for example, knight e3, we would exchange queens, and here, black is actually supposed to have kind of a big advantage. One thing to keep in mind here is that the material is actually equal right now. After the pawn takes on f6 and we take back with e takes f6, black actually has an extra pawn until white recaptures it. So once white recaptures it, we just return to equality, and then we have 2 bishops in exchange for the fact that we're having a slightly messier pawn structure. And there's tons of positions in chess like this, and the 2 bishops always prove to just be a little bit better than having a slightly messier pawn structure. So it's just better to have the bishops here. And actually, this kind of proves itself, like just a few more moves in this position. Bishop h6, creating this pin, rook e2, rook d8, and kind of white's tied all up in knots here, so like b3, just f5, gaining space, f4, and this is just a move that white has to play just to kind of unwind. He has to do something to figure out a way to develop his king side. So like f4, bishop takes f4, he needs to gain that tempo just so he can play bishop to b7, then rook b8, so black can finish its own development, knight to d5, king f8, c4, b5, this is all like computer analysis, c4, bishop b7, knight back, we have b4, bishop takes, knight a4, rook d7, rook back to c7. This position is just considered somewhere between major to decisive advantage black. Black is just doing really good in these types of positions. The bishop pair and the easier development is just so much better for black. Okay, so anyways, so going back to our main line. So we have king to b1, we're going to be playing knight d4, e5, knight f5 takes, ef, kind of back to the main line here. Knight d5 isn't so good. Also, queen d5 isn't very good for the same reason. Queens come off the board like queen d5, knight d5, knight e3, knight e3, just f5. Complete equality, absolutely nothing to write home about. This isn't as bad as the previous line where white had difficulty unwinding his development. White should still have a comfortable equality here, but still, bishop pair is going to be more important than the doubled pawns. Okay, so, and I mean, just to, kind of beat a dead horse, knight takes d5, knight e3, queen e3 is also possible. This is a little bit better than all the other tries at taking on d5, because at least in this position, white has managed to keep the queens on the board, which actually favors white. But bishop to e6, bishop to c4, f5 is just considered really close to equality. The position's just considered unclear according to theory, but basically black is already equalized. Again, bishop pair is probably more important than the fact that black has double pawns, even with queens still on the board. Okay, so anyways, so going back. Knight takes d5 is kind of a lemon. So bishop c5 is what everybody plays. They threaten to take the rook on f8. And again, when given a choice between defending your center and defending your exchange, you almost always defend the center. So d4, go ahead, take the exchange. So they do, because if they leave it for a move, like if they play like knight b5, knight e4, or anything, black is going to continue with rook e8, and now black has an extra pawn, a better center, 2 bishops, and absolutely no downsides in the position. So black is doing well. So bishop f8, queen f8, and here, white's position is already kind of dicey. What white needs to do is he needs to play this move knight to b5 to always be threatening to take back the d4 pawn. He needs to get that pawn back because right now black has, at least positionally, a lot going for him in exchange for just an exchange. He has two bishops, he has really good access to dark squares, and he has a huge presence in the middle of the board. If this situation remains, it's actually not white that's statically better because he has the extra exchange. It's black's that's statically better because he has a better center, more space, and two bishops. And that's just kind of what's going on here. So white needs to threaten to get this center. He needs to threaten to get the center back. He needs to play knight b5 and threaten to play knight to d4. If he plays some passive move, like if he plays another move that looks logical but doesn't put pressure on the middle, like if he plays knight e4, we're going to have knight e3 gaining a tempo against the rook. Rook e1, f5 gaining a tempo against the knight, defending d4. Knight back to g3, and this knight doesn't have any future forward moves. Just bishop e6, bishop to d3, queen to c5 is just considered advantage black. This position is just better for black. Black has a better center. Black has a uber knight sitting on the e3 square. The white knight on g3 just looks pathetic and sad. And then we have two bishops that are controlling the queen side and controlling the center of the board. This is advantage black. White doesn't have enough compensation for the middle. Yeah, I think that's a better way to say it than black has enough compensation for the exchange because it's too materialistic. So white doesn't have enough compensation for the middle. He doesn't have enough exchanges to compensate for the middle. So anyways, going back. We have this move, knight to b5. So threatening to get that pawn back is important. Knight e3, and now white is left with two kind of interesting options. Rook e1 and rook c1 have both been played. So rook c1 was the attempt that was made by Nigel Short, who played this against Magnus Carlsen in London back in 2009. And so Carlsen just continued with the move bishop to h6, just basically getting his exchange back by force. It puts the bishop on the same diagonal as the queen and rook, but Short's idea was just to grab the pawn on d4, take that center, and then knight f5, and then at least after Carlsen wins the exchange back, he's lost his bishop pair, and now it's just Carlsen's slightly inferior pawn structure, like after bishop d7, bishop d3, rook c8, gaining a tempo, back to d2, we have this exchange, and it's just Magnus Carlsen's slightly inferior pawn structure versus the fact that Magnus Carlsen has a little bit more activity, like after queen c5, bishop to d3. Magnus Carlsen is more active, but he has a worse pawn structure. It turned out the position ended in a draw. They played about another 50 moves, but eventually the position ended in a draw. This was Short versus Carlsen, played in London back in 2009. So instead of rook to c1, of course, the main move here is just kind of rook e1. And then what black needs to do is he needs to fortify that knight on the e3 square. So we're going to have f5 and then a whole bunch of different moves here. But like the main move, or one of the main moves, is just to get this pawn back, just to play knight to d4. And then we play pawn to f4 and we hold that pawn there. And we hold the knight on the e3 square. And we should have enough compensation just in the form of these two bishops coming into the game and having these diagonals. So, for instance, let's say they try to play a move like c3. We could play queen to d6, just attacking that knight on the d4 square, trying to get rid of the knight so that we can play bishop f5. So, for instance, if we were to play something simple, like if we were to play bishop to d3, we would have bishop d4, c4, queen d4, queen c3, even queen c3 here, queen c3, bishop e6, and black is maybe at least equal, maybe a little bit better. Black has an extra pawn here. He's maintained the outpost on the e3 square, and he's split up white's pawns. Black could also just maintain the queens. Queen d5 should also just be equal as well, or a little bit better. If white tries to break up the position of the knight, like if he plays a move like, for example, g3 in this position, like after all this, if he plays something like g3, he has to worry about bishop takes d4 followed by bishop f5 as a possibility. So that's why we're seeing kind of the various moves here. So c3, bishop d6. The other possibility here is just giving the exchange back. We could play rook to e3, fe3, queen e3, bishop d4, cd4. This is something that actually got tried in a game. This got tried between Sato versus Konerev, played in Minsk in 2010. Actually ended in a win for black. Even though white's up a pawn in this position, it's very difficult to hold it. The pawn on d4 will eventually fall to a direct attack, or white will have to give up some other pawn. So what happened in the game was just that. It went bishop e6, bishop d3, rook d8, hitting that pawn. Bishop e4, we don't want to lose the pawn on b7, so b7 to b6. Now the pawn on d4 either needs to be held or given up, and he decided to hold it, but that gives up the pawn on h2, and then black just kind of continued to try to play for a win from here, now that the material is equal and both sides are kind of active. But I mean, roundabouts, the position should still kind of, the initial position was at least close to equality. So anyways, so going back, those are a couple of options on how to handle this that white has. Another option that's kind of interesting is instead of knight takes d4, it is possible for white to play a move like f4 and just prevent black's main plan of playing f5 to f4. So this is kind of interesting, and it leads to a somewhat wild-looking line. Like, we can play queen c5 to hold the center point, which we absolutely have to. If we don't have the center, we don't have anything in this position. So queen c5, and then we have c3, just breaking up the middle of the board, and we're not playing f5 to f4, which means bishop f5 isn't on the table. So it's kind of interesting. We're going to have to play something like knight f1, and then of course we have this long forcing line that's very complicated. Rook to e8 check, bishop f8, queen d4, queen b5, queen d8. It looks like it's all over for black, but black has a few resources left. Knight to d2, and of course the queen can't take the knight because the rook on e8 is hanging. King to c2, and then we actually sack our queen. We play queen takes, we can play queen takes e8, queen takes e8, and then knight to e4, and this position is considered unclear. Black has 3 pieces for the queen, and it's just, I don't know what's going on. It's not clear what's going on. So this is something that's worth a shot that maybe white can try, and it's kind of interesting, but black is doing okay as well. So anyways, that's kind of the current theory on this stuff is you give up that exchange on the f8 square, you plop your knight on e3, you try to maintain your center, or you try to win back your exchange. A lot of times white will end up having to sack the exchange back anyway. He'll end up having to play rook e1 and rook takes e3 because black just starts putting a lot of pressure on white's position. And that's generally speaking how you should play these positions with the black pieces. So anyways, I hope you found this video helpful. I hope you learned something new about chess, and I hope you can use some of these ideas in your own games. Thank you very much for watching.